Thank you, Bruce. Thank you for help starting the Silver State Group. All of us are well better off than we were before the region was here. We have a very special Silver Sage member recognition this evening to share with you the amazing passion for Porsche and accomplishments is a woman who drives a blue Porsche. She lovingly calls it Blue Max. Please welcome Kitty Fleischman.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Marshal Red Jones knew the secret to getting past the tightest security systems at any business or doctor's office in Boise. When a stern, tight-lipped gatekeeper asked him who was calling, he'd say, "Tell him Dr. Red Jones is on the phone." After a quick, "Yes, doctor," the call was passed through immediately and given nearly immediate response as they came to find out what Dr. Jones could tell them about the prognosis of their Porsche's health. Since he first discovered Porsches back in the 1950s, it's unlikely that anyone has given more time or devotion to the local or national club or to the Porsche mark itself than Red Jones. Better known as Red, Marshall has been a member of the Silver Sage region since 1970, but his association with the cars goes back before that to the Volkswagen dealership where he worked in Corpus Christi, Texas for many years, where he met Judy. Prior to that, he had just worked on Volkswagens, and when Porsches started coming into the country, nobody there wanted to work on those funny little cars. What was the matter with them? Everything on them was different than other cars. But he liked them, and he wanted to work on them, and he took up the challenge. And in 1970, with the encouragement of his friend, boss, and mentor, Mick Williams, Marshall joined the Porsche Club of America. He and Judy were key members of the team that put on the Sun Valley Parade in 1971. He was the head mechanic for the tech and any problems that people had with their cars at that. And he did the same thing 30 years later in 2002 for the parade in Boise. It's something that if you stop and think about doing that for 30 years, that's pretty rugged duty. He's been working on Porsches for as long as there have been Porsches. He's dedicated his life to the cars and even called them his mistresses. Everything on them was different, and everything was made by hand, and over the years, he owned more than 60 Porsches. Many of them came in peach baskets and boxes and weren't much more than a title and some parts. But every one went out in better shape than it came in. At one point, he even acquired a Porsche tractor back in the 70s that they had in their yard. And Judy said it would sit out there for a while and he'd go out and start it. And she said, even as a tractor, he would start it up and you'd hear that pop, 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 and you knew it was a Porsche. So after years of working in Corpus Christi and for Norm Bishop in Boise, Red started Motorsports Northwest on Fairview Avenue in 1988 in a modest little building, and 2 years later he opened his shop on Americana Boulevard in 1990. In addition to being the best Porsche shop anybody knew about anywhere, it was also the ex officio clubhouse for the Silver Sage region, and it had a sterling reputation. Any of the parades, anything to do with Boise. How many of you have been to parade before? People know the Silver Sage region, don't they? And we have a good reputation with the 2 parades that we had. People loved it, and they always know. And they know about Red Jones, too. So, Jerry and I have always, when we've gone to parades, said how on an average morning going to work in Boise, you will see more Porsches than you will on your way to a parade until you get right there. We've been to parades in San Antonio and Montreal, and we saw way more Porsches going to work last week than we did on those trips. And I think a lot of that reputation has to do with Red Jones and the care he's given our cars. When I bought my first Porsche, it was a 1967 911, and I quickly found my way to motorsports. It was always a friendly place, and you could count on a cup of coffee, and Judy and Red would be there, and there were lots of the gang from the Silver Sage region. And I hadn't bought Lillian with the intention of racing it, but I think the first time I drove it, I realized that was over. And in the early 90s, one of our first trips with the club was up to Sun Valley. And on the way up there, we were getting lined up, and Red and Mike put me in the middle of the group because they didn't want us to fall behind. And as a former Alaskan and a former dog musher, I knew that unless you're the lead dog, the scenery never changes. So it wasn't very long that we were at the front of the line, and we've stayed there since then, risking a few tickets along the way. And we were on a trip one time, and I think we were heading for Sun Valley, but I'm not. Maybe we were heading for Jackpot. But there were 20. We were heading for Jackpot. We had 21 cars. And I was driving along, and I didn't have a speedometer at that point because my little old car had been owned by a smoker at one time. And I sent the instruments out to be recalibrated and cleaned, and I was stopped over by Glenn's Ferry at the front of the line doing 90. And the state trooper who stopped me, everybody kept going. I stopped. Everybody else kept going. And he said to me, "Did you know how fast you were going?" And I said, "Well, really, no, I didn't." And he said, "How could that be?" And I said, "Well, Red had sent the instruments out to be cleaned and recalibrated, and they weren't hooked up yet." He says, "Where did he send them?" And I said, "Hollywood Speedo." And with that, I was off the hook because I knew the answer. But at the same time, when I got to the next rest area, here's everybody waiting for me. And they said, "Did you get a ticket?" And I went, "No." And they said, "How would you avoid that?" And I said, "Oh, I just told them I was the membership chair, and I put a red asterisk next to the names of everybody who's on the trip." And I think some of the people waited years for their tickets. The last I heard, Helen and Ernie Ludwig were still waiting for their tickets to get there. But from my first autocross, the tech inspectors always complained about the loose wheel bearings on my car. And normally they decided, well, it was just that it was older and it was maybe a mistake by the inspector, and they just kind of let it go. And I had repairs scheduled for the following winter. But during the summer of '95, Lillian drove at every autocross and toured regularly and enthusiastically, rallied when we couldn't get out of it, and charged out Bogus Basin for BBB, and we even raced in the Tater Bug Classic at Firebird Raceway. And I got to see John Brennan in my rearview mirror, for those of you who remember John. But at the Portland Parade in 1994, the ugly truth turned out that Lillian had cancer. And she may have been brilliant in her red polo red coat, but her shiny good looks hid some ugly problems. And at the parade, the wheels fell off, at least figuratively. Lillian failed tech inspection, and as I stood there tearfully, men with screwdrivers were stabbing it into her frame and pulling out pieces, eager to prove that she was unsafe. After arriving in Portland and finding frantic messages scattered everywhere from parade registrations to the hotel where he and Judy were staying, Marshall tried to find someone in Portland who could fix the car for me. At that time I had leukemia and wasn't expected to live, fooled him. And Anyway, I figured that would be the only chance I would ever have to drive in a parade, and I was not a happy camper. For those of you who attended that parade, you will remember that I am guilty of almost criminal understatement when I say that I was distraught at the prognosis for Lillian's chances to drive the autocross course. I railed against the decision to every PCA and every parade official I could find. And there was no commuting her sentence. So Jerry flew home and brought back his little 74 914 Brother Speed. But it was a bitter disappointment to drive that car that I had only driven 8 miles from our hotel to the parade autocross site. Following parade, Marshall outfitted Lillian with a huge metal Band-Aid that was what he was trying to explain to the guy in Portland who didn't get it. He certainly had that vision thing when it came to medals, and he created a temporary fix that the Portland Porsche prophet thought was impossible, and Lillian established a new record at Bogus Basin with the Northwest Hill Climb Association less than a month after her death knell was sounded at parade. As it turned out, Lillian spent many of the dark days of the winter of 1994 and 1995 with her engine spread out from one end of motorsports to the other in various stages of disrepair. Disrespect too, but that was from Portland. Judy and Marshall would kid me that I bought the car 3 times, but it was well worth it, and it would have been a bargain at twice the price. In addition to replacing the oil pan and reinforcing the wheels, what started out as repairs on a simple oil leak began turning up some of her ugly secrets and explaining the intermittent problems that I'd had with the engine. As it was, broken pieces of piston rattled around inside the engine. Lillian's pistons were worn but intact. Somewhere in her checkered past, Lillian's original engine was swapped out and the one that was substituted had been blown up. And rather than fixing it right, someone had clobbered it back together and sold it to the first unsuspecting hayseed to come down the pipe. That would have been me. Motorsports wasn't far from my office, and for months, when Jerry and I would drive by late at night, there'd be Marshall working on Lillian. He doesn't just work on Porsches, he loves them, and he's devoted his life to them. She was an amazing little car, and he is a deeply dedicated, amazing man. He tore into the frame and replaced Lillian's pan with fresh metal, cutting and grinding away the cancer. It was definitely major surgery, far worse than even he had anticipated. And he started taking it apart from the old frame. It was painfully obvious that Lillian was held together more from force of habit than from anything that was related to physics or engineering. The restorative surgery, like most medicine, was as much art as mechanics, and it was fascinating to watch the progress. It's how I learned enough to do well on pet quizzes. So when all was said and done, thanks to Marshall, Lillian's name could well have been changed to Lazarus. She was back from the dead, and she was still fast. Always looking for a way to get faster, I used to haunt motorsports and pester Red for ideas. I wanted to race, and I wanted to do well. As I listened to conversations about sticky tires, short shifts, racing brakes, and other tweaks to help get faster, Red gave me some of the best advice I've ever gotten about racing. He said, first learn to drive, then start spending money to get faster. Over the years, I've patched together a lot of cars whose driver skills weren't up to the levels of their cars. So I tried getting faster slowly. It's excellent advice that I've almost always followed, although there was one trip where after I bought Blue Max, where I was invited to be an instructor at the Mazda Performance Driving School at Thunderhill. It was my second year teaching at the school, and I was taking Silver Sage member Kevin Peterson for a ride around the track at 138 miles an hour. Kevin was screaming and pounding on the passenger brake through most of the circuit. I don't get to use 6th gear in Blue Max very often, because I need to be going about 120 to do that. There aren't a lot of chances unless you're on the track. And I prefer to brake late and hard anyway, so I was almost at the corner. I hit the brakes and reached for fifth gear, knew it was wrong, and had to let it go anyway. I ended up blowing up the top half of Blue Max's engine. I couldn't get it over 100 miles an hour after that, but I was able to drive it home. At Motorsports on Monday morning, Red looked it over, wiggled the valve back and forth with one finger, shook his head, and gave me a look that didn't need words to tell me he thought I was an idiot. He said, "There's no reason on earth for this car to be running this well." But mostly I listened to his advice. Time kept moving. We loved the tours. One of our favorites had to have been a tour to Sumter Junction up in the Blue Mountains. It was a beautiful fall day, perfect road, terrific dinner, and Judy Jones found a little pot-bellied iron stove. We're willing to bet that was the first and only time someone fitted a pot-bellied stove through the sunroof of a 911 for the 125-mile ride home from Sumter Junction to Boise, and it was quite a process to watch it fitted in there. So many precious memories. Once during a river festival flyover, the Blue Angels spotted all the Porsches at Motorsports from the air, and Marshall didn't even have to go out in the shop to get autographs from all of them. They came there. Stories about Marshall and Judy picking up stranded Porsche drivers all over the region. He made more than one trip. Midnight trip to help club members stuck in the Tulies with car problems. At one time, a damaged 924 was seen in the compound behind Motorsports. Learning that the local Corvette club wanted to use the Porsche as its Buck a Bash fundraiser, he quietly purchased the car and rescued it from a humiliating end. There were years of BBB auctions at Motorsports with various shenanigans going on, but the shop was always scrubbed spotless before the auction, and somehow with all of that going on, Red kept the cars moving, and we had fun, but his devotion to the cars was foremost and unwavering. For all the things that happened with the club, Red was always the first one to volunteer. He brought the cones for the autocrosses, and he took them back afterwards and put them away. He recently sold Goldie, his 1979 911 SC that he autocrossed with gusto that kept drivers 40 years his junior scrambling to try and catch him. He won autocross series in the region and still holds a record at Bogus Basin. He trophied at the Portland Parade and captured second place in his class at the 1998 Oklahoma Parade. And I think there are several more I'm missing on that. As much magician as mechanic, much of the work he's done has been for the love of the cars. When the bill for Lillian's work came, it couldn't begin to cover the many hours of toil he poured into that little car. Everyone expects their Porsches to have good care, but Marshall has done works on cars that other shops considered scrap metal on rubber, and they were perfect when they drove away. For more than 50 years, Marshall Jones has driven, supported, admired, purchased, loved, toured, rallied, talked, restored, autocrossed, faith-healed, rallied, maintained, and hill-climbed Porsches. He's a man who lives and breathes Porsches and deeply respects what they are. We've only known the Silver Sage Porsche Group for about half of its life, but it has given us some of the best memories. Red and Judy Jones have been a huge part of them. And it was with great pleasure and pride that I worked with Judy in 1998, putting together our memories and laughing about all the things we could think of for Marshall's nomination for the Enthusiast of the Year at the Steamboat Colorado Parade. And of course, he won.
And Marshall is also our lifetime member, the only lifetime member we've ever had from Silver Sage. So with that, Marshall, he's not able to make it tonight because of health, but Judy is willing to accept and will definitely convey all of our thoughts and love for him.